This is Kanzenshuu, the podcast, episode 510 for April 5th, 2024. Welcome back, everyone, to Kanzenshuu,
the podcast,
an extension of the all-encompassing Dragon Ball fan site.
Kanzenshuu.
Yes, normally I'd say we cover anything and everything Dragon Ball in hopes of enlightening, a little entertaining. It's not that kind of episode this time around, though. We are gathering here today and releasing on what I believe would be his 69th birthday to celebrate a pretty cool guy. And that guy is Akira Toriyama, who passed away back on March 1st from an acute subdural hematoma, which we learned shortly thereafter was almost certainly related to the fact that he had a brain tumor that he had been dealing with for some time. The news simultaneously broke us and motivated us here at Kanzenshuu in a variety of ways. We'll get to that in a minute. We should probably do some introductions. It's Mike and Meri here in this episode. We have so much on tap for you this episode, and I want to get to it, but unfortunately, you stuck with us for a little bit here at the top of the show.
We promise we'll be brief. Maybe.
Maybe. That's a tough thing for me to do. Let's introduce who we are. Maybe you're coming to this. Maybe you saw, there's this person I like, and apparently they submitted something to this show, and I want to hear what they had to say. Again, you're stuck with us at the top of the episode. My name is Mike. I go by Vegeta EX online. I am one of the co-founders of Kanzenshuu here, which we fused in 2012, but the website itself, the underlying skeleton bones of Kanzenshuu date back to Vegeta EX's Ultimate DBZ Links page, which I launched in January 1998 as a webpage on the World Wide Web. And I never stopped.
No, you did have a brief period where you did stop.
That's sort of true. And then I went back and I looked at the pages in the meantime. And even when I took my ball and went home, I was still posting news updates on that blank white page during that time. Very, very strict. Anyway, so I've been here. What do I do on Kanzenshuu? You name it. I do a little bit of everything except translate. Heath and I, we assign like fake titles to ourselves. I guess I'm the news manager. If you see a news post, I probably wrote it, but I do guide work, I do formatting, I break the site on a semi-regular basis, and Heath helps put it back together again. Working on the forum, whether that's moderation or updating, improving accounts, like if it's something on the website, I probably had a hand in it at some point. And that's me. I've been here for a very long time. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Here we are. Meri.
Yes, I'm Meri. I go by Meri online.
That's easy.
It is really easy. I founded the website Temple of Trunks back in March 1998, so I wasn't too far after you on the interwebs. Mm-hmm. It was a relic of its time in terms of being a character shrine dedicated to Trunks, but as the years went on, it became more of a general Dragon Ball comedy website with very much a Trunks family focus, lots of content users submitted. Many friends of the site have gone on to support the community in one form or another, which has been really interesting as the years go on.
Everyone's like, oh yeah, I went to TOT. Of course I did.
And, I've kind of fallen off a bit, but I have stayed relatively in the community-ish by being a guest on this podcast, much more in its founding days back in the mid-2000s. Yes, this podcast is that old. And I am married to this here Mike fellow who you just listened to, and I'm sure we'll get into that. We'll get into that.
Right. So with that said, what's on tap this episode? We're going to do a little bit of discussion up front with the expected things. What prepped us for this fandom, recaps on how we discovered Toriyama and Dragon Ball. But then more than anything else, we're going to share stories. I love storytelling. We're going to have stories from our extended family here at Kanzenshuu. I often say and describe myself as I'm a very poor critic. I'm not good at being critical of things, but what my mutant superpower, secret mutant superpower is I gather the best of the best and I bring them together and I let them do the hard work and I just moderate that discussion. That's sort of what I'm doing here this episode. I know that I'm not personally equipped to as eloquently describe Toriyama's impact on my life as best as I would like to, I'm going to try a little bit here. So instead, I'm going to leave it to everyone else. You're going to hear some familiar voices from the past and present of this podcast, and some other voices as well. Not shy about saying I called in some favors on this one. You're going to hear some amazing folks here. But again, you're stuck with us for a little bit. Meri, I want to chat with you here at the top of the show before we transition into that other stuff. The way I want to phrase it is like what prepped us, what primed us for Toriyama and Dragon Ball, because obviously we had a life before Dragon Ball, but there are like these ripples through time that lead you to these moments. Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to get into how we got there. So for you, I don't know, like what was your first nerdy adjacent thing that kind of like primed your young mind for what this was going to be in the future?
I had an answer for you, and then I realized I can go even further back.
Yeah.
If we're talking about what elements in your life did you obsess over?
Sure, yeah.
So going back way early, 1986, I was obsessed with an American cartoon called Gem and the Holograms.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I think that planted the seeds for like my natural tendency to seek out media, whether it's cartoons or otherwise, with really great storytelling and really great characters.
Yeah.
And also my uncanny mutant ability on my part is to watch the same crap over and over again and not get sick of it. I did that with Gem.
Yeah.
I didn't really have anything in my life like that until I discovered X-Men in 1993 by way of the animated series.
Yeah.
I very quickly sought out the comic books. And it was very interesting being, a 12-year-old girl suddenly reading superhero comics. But I think, the elements of sci-fi and soap opera and character development and current social issues helped prime my brain again for what would come after that, which was branching out of American-made media, I guess, and nerdy storytelling. Mm-hmm. 1995? Probably 95, 96. I have to go back and look. I caught Sailor Moon getting ready for school at like 6 o'clock in the morning. I was like, what is this? It's girl superheroes. Put it in my veins.
Right. And to pause there, jumping back to X-Men, what you've told me a lot of times is when you saw the early episodes where you see Rogue, you see Storm, you're like, holy shit, women can be superheroes.
Women can be superheroes, and it's not like Wonder Woman. So it was a whole new realm for me, just being like, whoa, I didn't know there was female representation in superheroes.
And so then you get this new cartoon that's doing more of that.
And again, like I didn't know, it kind of found me. All this stuff found me.
Yeah.
Like I would just be watching the channels and like, oh, this looks intriguing. So Sailor Moon, kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
At that point, I was like, oh, this is that Japanimation stuff that seems like more edgy, and it's from overseas, and it's so exotic.
It had to be 95 because what comes next is you see Dragon Ball.
Yes, I saw it's kind of a similar thing, getting ready for school at the ass crack of dawn and seeing Dragon Ball.
Yep.
I couldn't even tell you what episode it was. It was pretty early, like maybe 2 or 3.
Right, so this is Funimation's first go with the series, syndication, BLT, Canadian cast.
Yeah, and what really struck me about how different it was from Sailor Moon, especially it being Dragon Ball, was the cartoony and humorous nature of it, but still being really an interesting fusion of action and adventure. And at that point, I would eat up anything that was anime. I think in rapid succession, it was Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball, Ranma, then like go to Blockbuster and find anything, watch Sci-Fi Channel and watch anything.
Whoops, rent a Ninja Scroll.
I actually never had that experience until I met you, Mike, actually. So I just loved Dragon Ball from the get-go just because of how different it was from anything else I had ever seen at that point. And I think I discovered Dragon Ball Z by way of magazines.
Probably. It's probably like a combination of ads and magazines, but then also you were hearing things at school.
At school, yes.
Like, because it was 13 episodes, then it was gone.
Right.
And that was it. And then, a year later, we got Z in syndication 96 there.
Yeah, I remember at school I was browsing in America, and a classmate was like, oh, I know that show. That's Goku's son. He was pointing to a picture of Gohan in my magazine. And I'm like, what? Goku has a kid? And that just blew my mind when I realized, wait a minute, this is more than just what I've seen on TV. I think this has some legs to it.
Yeah,
I think the show is going somewhere.
like very long-term storytelling.
I also have to wonder at what point did I start to use the internet to start researching what I didn't know. It just seems like such a novel thing.
Yeah.
To not be exposed to the whole breadth of what's online and then like spoil an entire series for yourself. That would come later, I suppose. But
sure.
Yeah, does that answer the question?
It does. So let's pause there. I'll do a little bit of mine, and then we're going to come back to a couple other questions and reflections there. So for me, when I think about kind of like what primed me for Dragon Ball, it was primarily video games for me. I was heavily into fighting games. I think Mortal Kombat was probably my entryway to fighting games, if I'm being honest. But it was Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. That was like, the heyday of that, where especially like MK2 versus the Street Fighter 2 series. So we're talking like 94-ish, like right before Dragon Ball's coming over, or as Dragon Ball's coming over here to America from Funimation. So I got into this is an anime aesthetic, which I didn't really understand at the time, from Street Fighter over there, and especially as Street Fighter Alpha came out. But then with Mortal Kombat, we've been joking about this a lot lately. Like, I was really into the lore of Mortal Kombat, and stuff I didn't really quite grasp yet was like what it was taking wholesale from kung fu films, but also kind of like these wuxia underpinnings that they were pulling from all these things that they knew from Chinese films and other stuff that they were into. And so when I saw that stuff reflected in other things, so I'm doing like the fighting game thing over here, then I'm starting to discover Japanese role-playing games on consoles too. And of course that would come to a head, I think, for everyone in 97 with Final Fantasy VII. But by that point I was already into Dragon Ball. But all these things were kind of priming me. And then in video game magazines, I've talked about this constantly. You flip to the back of any EGM in the mid-90s, early mid-90s, and what do you see? Splashes of the Super Battle Collection, like all these golden-haired warriors. There's a green guy there too. That guy looks exactly like that guy, except that one has black hair, that one has gold hair. There's a whole bunch of video games. That one has a hat. And it was just like, I don't know what I'm looking at, but it clearly stuck in my mind, because then the weekend of whatever the next weekend after the weekend of September 14th was in 1996. It was that weekend, because my friend Ryan in high school, I must have been a freshman in high school there in September 1996, came back to school beginning of next week, said, I saw this awesome show over the weekend. You got to check it out. And so what I saw that next weekend was episode 2 of Dragon Ball Z in its original syndication run. And I never stopped from that moment. It was like, holy shit, this is that thing that I keep seeing in the video game magazines. I've been seeing talk about this. I get it. I understand it now. And for me, it was like, okay, look at the bright colors on the screen. These characters are fighting, but they're having what felt like intense conversations. And there was clearly a backstory. Like, I'm coming in, not just in media res of episode 2, but like clearly like this guy knows that green guy. I don't know what their back history is.
And somehow that was compelling, even not knowing anything. Right.
And there's a larger conversation we had about, can you start with Raditz? That's a conversation for a different day that we can maybe have. But that was how I was primed and how I discovered that series. So now we kind of have to get to all right, that was 95, 96. Here we are in 2024. What Toriyama and what Dragon Ball has meant to us and how it's shaped our life. How do you encapsulate that?
We're sitting in a room where we're literally encapsulated by it.
That's true.
And I think, maybe that's the manifestation of what it means from a consumerism and also wanting to seek out the information standpoint.
Yeah. You're going to hear it countless times from people on here, like, my friend group, significant others, everything in my careers, everything in my life was brought to me by Toriyama. And it's the same for us. You and I talk constantly about where we are in our careers here in our 40s. And it's like making a fan site in 1998 is the direct ancestor of where we are now.
I kind of forgot about that. Yeah. So just for a bit of context, like you and I didn't know anything about making websites, but we were both in love with Dragon Ball, and we picked that as our fandom obsession of choice to be like, we're going to learn how to make a website from the ground up, hand coding it, images, well, maybe stealing images from other websites, linking stuff back and forth. And then somehow taking that passion and turning it into what ultimately became our careers.
And it's everything that we did with website. Yeah, it was there's design in there, there's coding in there, less of that definitely for both of us these days.
Right.
But it's project management, it's communications, it's development, it's marketing. Like that's what that
Learning
is.
how to build a community and keep a community together.
Yeah, community management, absolutely. Editing, all those things.
Everything I learned about adulting, I learned from Dragon Ball.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, just you and I. Just more happenstance. We were already aware of each other's existence before we met because we had some of the largest Dragon Ball sites of the day. And we actually ended up on the same server for a period of time. We were talking about this with friends the other day. How, I mean, the internet was just a disaster, and we weren't even quite at the .com bubble burst there in like 2001.
Because really the only home for fan sites was GeoCities, and Tripod.
Like the free hosting of the day, and you would get just a limited amount of server space and extremely limited bandwidth.
And when your site gets too popular, you blow up those free services and they kick you off, and you're like,
So we had some other friends that were either, slightly older than us or in university, buying server space. Scott, who ran SRE DBZ's site back in the day, he had a dedicated server for a bit, and he sub-hosted both of our sites. That was probably why we talked for the first time. It was like, hey, server buddy, hey, we're setting up for sites, and hey, what's your deal?
Right, and I think, as people who got pretty well known for running websites, I mean, you kind of all run into each other eventually, either through IRC or chatting elsewhere. AOL Instant Messenger.
Absolutely. And for us, that was the initial contact. And then, some time passes. Then turns out we're at the same college. We weren't that far from each other where we were living at the time. And, here we are 24 years almost. So it's going to be 24 years later this year. After that, we just kind of never left each other's sides after that point.
Well, I wouldn't have it any other way. We got Dragon Ball and Toriyama to thank for that.
Yeah, it's just that you keep tracing it all back, and it's like, okay, it's from websites back to Dragon Ball itself, back to X-Men and Street Fighter, back to Gem, like all those things kind of like led us to exactly who we are and where we are now. Again, you're going to hear that countless times from a whole bunch of people. So, we're not unique in that situation, but that doesn't make it any less special, especially for us.
And
it's
doesn't
special
that
to
show
us.
how amazing Dragon Ball is at getting a hold of you and not letting go?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'll be the first to admit I haven't sat and watched Dragon Ball in a really long time. But
I haven't either, to be frank.
Such a part of my being that you never get sick of it. I don't think I ever woke up one day and decided, I hate Dragon Ball.
I'm done with that. I'm
done with it. I'm over it.
Yeah.
I'll still buy the occasional figurine. And it's sometimes I go on eBay and look at the prices of cells. And I'm like, oh man, they're a bit pricey, even as a grown-ass adult.
So let's transition the conversation a little bit. This is the hard part. This is how we initially reacted to and dealt with the news of Toriyama's passing. You'll hear this later if you're listening to the audio version. I think a lot of people had the same experience, which is you were playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and you refreshed Twitter and you saw the official Dragon Ball website posting on Twitter, and everything kind of fell apart that night. That was it for me. For you were sitting on the couch, you were probably playing Marvel Snap next to me while I was playing Final Fantasy. And it was just I saw this post. I initially saw the Japanese one. I was saving the game or something. I had 3 seconds, so I just refreshed Twitter, and there it was. I was initially in Japanese, so I have to do a translation on to see what it is. So it's taking a couple series of moments and events for me to grasp what it is I'm reading. And I don't entirely remember what I said or what I did, but I obviously told you sitting there next to me, and it was just okay, this night is over. At that point,
I think I was like, what? And denial. I thought you were pulling one over on me because it couldn't possibly be true.
No.
Because Toriyama's immortal.
So this is the weird part of the conversation where it's celebrity isn't quite the right word to describe Toriyama, but it's a close approximation. It gets you most of the way there. Certainly not a guy we ever knew, never had a chance to meet or see. I will forever regret not going to New York for the launch of the Shonen Jump print magazine and not seeing Toriyama. But as you've heard, Dragon Ball, and obviously by extension because he made it, Toriyama, has had a very clear and direct impact and guidance on our lives. It was a real... I don't even know how to describe what my reaction was. There was just a lot of sitting and staring for another day or so.
Like numb. You're just numb. I felt numb for 2 days at least.
Yeah.
I felt like I was mourning a family member or someone else important in my life passing.
Yeah.
It felt like just that hollow sense of like, this isn't real life.
Yeah.
Even though I was at that point obsessively refreshing, my social media feeds as I was seeing everyone else's reaction. And I kind of used that to level set my own feelings.
Yeah.
To be like, I'm not the only one who's in denial about this, right? I'm not the only one who's gutted by this, right?
Yeah, not a like, oh, that's a shame. Really great stuff.
Absolutely,
Good for
global, widespread.
I think we've all
mourning.
said this. Like, there was a 24-hour world peace for a brief moment on social media. Like, that's not an original idea, an expression for me. We've all seen and said that before. But that's how it felt. Yeah, it was something truly unique that our followers or follower list is self-selective. We're going to read from whoever we want to read from. But yeah, for me, that was actually how I coped. I felt like for the next day.
Me too.
And I
couldn't work the next day, really.
No,
I phoned it in.
That was difficult. That was a bad Friday. I felt bad that I didn't have something to say right away, but I didn't know what to say. And I didn't know who's going to quote me or take something out.
You feel that pressure of Mike, you're a leading voice in the community.
Yeah.
Why aren't you saying anything?
I couldn't.
I think in those instances, you do what you got to do. Don't worry about expectations.
Yeah. For me, it was reading everyone else's stuff was what helped.
Mm-hmm.
Like you, just constantly refreshing, reading everything that everyone had to say was incredible, and it really helped me process and cope for a day.
I was worried you thought I wasn't upset enough.
No, not at all.
Okay. and that comes back to not even counting Toriyama, but just when anyone passes, there is no right or wrong way to mourn.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen this and felt this and learned this more as time goes on. And I grow up over time too. Whether someone's expressing it through fan art or something, and you're like, oh, maybe is that a little tacky to draw it that way? It's like, no, everyone's grief is felt and experienced and processed in totally different ways. And whatever helps you, great. That's what you need.
Maybe what we are creating and recording right now
Definitely.
Is that.
Yeah. I need this for me. And we've heard from other folks. Another thing that we've already done, and if you're listening to the audio podcast, you'll hear later. That people said that was helpful to them, and I hope it can be. So again, I'm not the best to describe my feelings or how I process them, but I hope I gave you a little bit of kind of what's been going on in my mind. It took a little bit of time. Obviously, at this point, the man's been gone for a month. That's tough, and we didn't learn about it for a week after. You think about someone of his stature, who knew what at what point, and we're learning more that obviously some folks in his circle knew what he was dealing with. We've translated a whole slew of comments. One of his former assistants knew he had a tumor. Obviously, folks there at Shueisha knew he was ill. There were things going on. There's a comment Toriyama made in preparation for his Lifetime Achievement Award, where he mentions his health, which is devastating in retrospect, because we got that comment after he had already passed. That's just rough. There's so much we could say about Toriyama as an artist, as an illustrator, as a storyteller, and there's more we can and will do in that regard. We can't encapsulate all that here, but I do just want to touch on a couple quick things about him that I think make him special. And we'll talk more again about his industry background and how he came to all this. But I constantly say to you, X-Men sounds great in theory, and then you throw some comic pages in front of me, and I'm like, what is this bullshit? I can't make sense of anything I see on this page. And as extremely long-term One Piece on and off fans as well, we look at those manga pages like, what is this bullshit? I can't make sense of what I see on the page. And that was never a problem with Toriyama. And I don't mean to compare and contrast
I know
Toriyama.
You're coming here shitting on my fandoms. No, but I get it. I mean, if you don't grow up with it and you don't quickly get acclimated to various artists, for one thing, and inkers trying to somehow put together cohesion as opposed to one man in control of his own creative output.
Yeah.
Like, there is no comparison.
And that's why I feel like I'm lucky and spoiled because, my introduction was Toriyama, and there's never been a moment where I've looked at a Toriyama page and not understood the flow of what I'm supposed to look at and felt the impact of everything. And it's not just his art, it's his storytelling. I shared something on Twitter the other day. I'm currently reading through the entire works of Stephen King. So I'm up to, just finished reading On Writing, which was his reflection around the year 2000 on the craft. And what I love about both Stephen King and Toriyama is that they don't plot out their series. They let the events and in particular the characters experience their stories.
Crazy because like the manga feels so well storyboarded.
Yeah. And it's not that he didn't do storyboards. Oftentimes he would go from early sketches to just like final inking on the page because he waited until the last minute to do it, but also because he's just that talented.
He's just a fucking genius. Master of his craft.
Again, I'm so spoiled because I can't look at any other manga and not feel like I wish I could just look at a Toriyama page right now.
The clean lines and just the framing.
Yeah.
And the posing.
Everything.
The pacing.
From the start, Wonder Island is extremely rough. But when you look at his caricatures, the way that he drew people and the impact on the page and his big block lettering, like you can see what Toriyama saw in him from the start and be like, holy shit, this guy's going to change this industry. And you heard so much of that from folks who saw Dr. Slump from the first chapter being like, yo, this guy right
this
here.
This guy's legit.
I'm spoiled. Toriyama spoiled us as fans of fiction and art. And it's not just his art, it's his storytelling too. It's his dialogue, the way that his characters say the things that they say.
And everyone feels real. You can kind of connect with everybody, no matter how ridiculous, if they're a piece of talking poop or big ass superhero.
They're so earnest in how inexplicably bizarre they are. I don't know how to describe that either. Like they're so self-serious in how unserious they are. It's just like you never question it. It's like this is a real
I buy
world.
into it.
Yeah, you buy it from the start.
Rare talent.
Yeah. Even ignoring Dr. Slump and Dragon Ball, you could go on for hours about his contributions to multiple mediums. I mean, whether it is his monster and character designs in Dragon Quest, of course, his designs for Chrono Trigger. Of course, we all think of his mecha designs. Did you know he did mecha designs for something called Gulliver Boy, a series that he wasn't in charge of, but of course, with his mecha designs, they would want someone like that involved in it. There's a lot of stuff that I don't think people realize that Toriyama did, whether it's logos for a symphony or local events in Japan. He had like an environmental stint for a while there. Things like his comic and the Biosphere pamphlet and some of his other one-shots and Sandland alone. I mean, tracing back Sandland and Drought to literally his earliest works, Toriyama has things to say that even I don't think he's aware that he's saying in his works sometimes, and he would shrug them off, and Toriyama would certainly shrug them off, but they're there. There's just so much to this guy. So at this point, I think I'm kind of done talking. I want to turn it over to other people. So here's what the rest of this episode is going to be. First up, we're going to get comments from the other Kanzenshuu co-founders. We're going to get Julian, Heath, and Jake. We all really wanted to record together, but the last couple of weeks just have not been kind to us. Our schedules have not been kind to us.
Also.
Global time zones. So we collected recordings from everyone. So that's a little bit why, it's been a month. Are you going to do a podcast episode? Like, yeah, but also I want, and I hope people, and I think people will understand, like, this is tough for us to do too. The way we process it and think about, like, am I dealing with this the right way for me, for other people? How will this be taken? There's so much that I think about as I'm making something, like, I got to do it right, but nothing's ever going to be anyway. So you're going to hear from the Kanzenshuu people. That's who you're going to hear from first. Then we're going to transition into stories and tributes from the extended family out there, friends and family of Kanzenshuu. Incredible thanks go out to everyone that did this for us. Again, you're going to hear from folks you definitely know from here on this podcast, from the past and present and future of this podcast.
Future?
Yeah, sure.
Whoa.
And then other folks that I personally reached out to, and I said, could you share something? Would you be willing to share something? And everyone had just great things to say. Just absolutely jumped at it. And a lot of people said it was very tough for them to do. So I want to acknowledge that up top too. Like, this is a tough ask. This is something that you're recording about your own personal experience and feelings, and you're going to put that out into the world too. And I appreciate those who did, and those who couldn't. I understand. Like, this is a tough ask. So the love and appreciation runs deep on this. You're going to hear a lot. There's a lot from a lot of people. So it's weird to say, like, I hope you enjoy Otanoshimi ni, but not really.
I hope it allows people to reflect on their own personal relationship with the works of Akira Toriyama. So as you hear these stories, think about like your own journey.
Yeah.
And what it means to you. So
you're going to get all that, and then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to wrap things up. If you're a listener of the standard audio podcast, like you download an RSS feed, you grab it, or you're listening maybe on like Spotify or something, you'll see there's still a ton of time left after that in the episode. So for those audio listeners, you're going to get an addendum of our conversations from back during our live stream on March 9th. If you haven't heard, and you probably hear at the end of every podcast episode, we talk about this every Saturday night. Friends and family of the site, many of whom, again, you're going to hear this episode, we get together and we play Mario Kart on stream on Twitch. It's just a thing that we do.
It's something that grew out of the pandemic.
Right.
It's a way to stay social, and here we are 4 years later and we still do it.
Yes. And so we're all talking like, so are we doing it this weekend? And we're like, yeah, we need to. So it was kind of like a group grief therapy session for us. So it's going to be a lot more raw and a lot of dark humor at times too. So just prepare for that. So that's what it'll be after on the audio version. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, well, there's already that full thing already on YouTube. So click over and check that out. And that's got video too, because it is from the live stream. So it's got gameplay. Yes, I was playing Mario Kart, but there's a lot of just like, talking heads on screen doing the whole thing. That's on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kanzenshuu. And it's also up in a news post on the main website, kanzenshuu.com. Speaking of our website, reminder that alongside the news post we did for Toriyama's passing, we translated and collected a ridiculous wealth of comments from industry colleagues, peers, friends, everyone from Oda and Kishimoto over on the manga side to video game legends like Sakaguchi and Hori, and even some government statements from across the globe. There's a lot there thanks to Julian and Zénpai just really doing everything on that. It was truly incredible. So that's the flow for the rest of this episode. Enjoy. Not the right word. What's a better word?
Just
reflect. We're here with you. We're all here alongside each other.
You're here because we all love the same stuff.
Here it comes, and I'll see you on the flip side of all that to wrap up the episode.
So, where to begin? I know I've told this story before, at least in part, but I guess there's an ending now, so I'll start from the beginning. So I first encountered the work of Akira Toriyama, I guess you could say, as a 13-year-old junior high schooler. And like many at that age, I was frustrated and confused and angry about the world because, teenagers and hormones. And it was in that environment that I ran across almost at random an episode of Dragon Ball Z that was playing on TV right before I went to school one day. And, at first what attracted me was the punchy, kicky energy beam stuff that happened with that. But I became engrossed in the story and I started looking forward to seeing that. Now, it's strange to think, but it's hard to know for sure what you're going to become a fan of out random. But not long after that, I sought out the comic after I learned that it was originally based on Japanese manga, which, I didn't really know what that was at the time, but I was eager to learn. And so it wasn't very long before I started reading the translation released via Viz Media. I think it was Viz Comics at the time. One thing led to another, and I decided I also really wanted to learn Japanese. I guess I'd always kind of had an interest in languages. I was the weird kid at school who decided to take not one, but 2 different foreign languages. So, that was just extra. And I guess the surprising thing is, though, that I stuck with it. I think partly because of my love for the material. Akira Toriyama's art was something else. And it's been said many times before, he had a way of economy with the line art. He could express a lot with relatively few strokes of the pen. He rarely used tone, although, as I would later learn, it was mostly out of laziness rather than a deliberate artistic choice. And he just had a knack for using subtle cues to sort of guide your eye along the page. So, he was an easy artist to get into, and I still don't think I've encountered anyone who's quite as good as him in terms of that. A lot of other popular artists sort of emulate him. I know people love One Piece by Eijiro Oda, which is seen as sort of Dragon Ball's successor in terms of sheer popularity, but his panels are so crammed with stuff. He does not leave anything out, and it can become quite taxing, but it was never like that with any of Toriyama's work. And as time went on, I, discovered his other stuff as well. I think I first read Sandland when it came out in English. And after that, I started seeking out less than stellar online scans of other things with rather dubious translations, or just a person translating it gave up and just wrote untranslated. But, with my burgeoning Japanese level, I started seeking out the original material. I mean, I also came across Dr. Slump and started reading that as well. Toriyama's sense of humor was off-kilter, and in some ways, I think that kind of appealed to me as well. I mean, obviously, there's the slightly perverse things that, don't really fly as well as they did back then. And, I let that slide because so much other stuff was just genuinely funny. But he just had a very interesting way of looking at the world. But it's strange. I got into it to the point that I very single-mindedly focused on things that would have a profound effect on my later life. So in college, I made the point of taking Japanese lessons. I studied abroad in Kyoto, and all of this was happening right amidst the sort of resurgence of Dragon Ball after its fallow period. So right at the tail end of high school and going into college, they had the Dragon Ball Kanzenban and other things coming out. And I was just accidentally at the forefront of this stuff and was able to report on it by dint of the fact that I was learning Japanese. After that, it's strange. I decided that I wanted to go to Japan and work for a while before doing anything else. And one thing led to another, and I ended up meeting my wife and having kids. And then Battle of Gods hit while I was living there, and my son was getting ready to be born. And I will say that I think that period did so much for my Japanese, just because I was trying to get as much information and as accurately as possible. And, it was funny in a way seeing the creator get as back into his own material, even though he's, professed not to look back at things that he's already done. And that sort of began this very intense period. I mean, we'd already had Dragon Ball Kai in the midst of all that, which I was also in Japan for and watched along with my my daughter, who was too young to understand what it was. But I really gained an appreciation for the sheer impact that it had on pop culture here. And also, I think, started to come to grips with how much it had affected me as well. It's weird to think, but now I'm 39. I'm a year out from the age that Toriyama himself was when he ended Dragon Ball, and I'm kind of starting to see things from his point of view when he ended the series. So much of his later stuff is not action focused. It's more character driven. It's more based on subtle interactions. And I am here for that kind of stuff now. It's funny because when I look at fans online, I can almost gauge how old they are and how much experience they have by how attached to the action elements of Dragon Ball they are. And it's strange, especially when someone so closely associated with my youth, I guess, passes away. So 2 years ago, even the same month, my mother passed away after a short bout with cancer. It was all very sudden, and things went downhill very quickly. And, getting off topic here, but while there were many things that I had wished that I could have shared with her or had her share with me before she passed, after everything had settled, I was left with a sense of my own mortality. When somebody who is always there suddenly isn't, especially someone who's been there since you were very young. You think, oh, my time is limited as well, isn't it? And I got that same feeling again when Toriyama passed away. And it wasn't just me. So I am a licensed school teacher in Japan, and that day happened to be the day of the graduation ceremony for the junior high school that's attached to our high school. And once the news hit, just so many teachers around my generation just seeming lost in contemplation. We all sort of lost a bit of our youth, and we're now faced with what comes after. And reading the tributes that came in pretty much immediately, it's clear that so many different people felt largely the same way. Now, it's hard to say, and I don't really want to speculate on how much he was aware of his own time, but it seemed to me that Toriyama himself had started getting very active just over the past few years, even more so than the way that he had been involved since Battle of Gods, a bit more hands-on. It seemed like he was really trying to put something out there, and especially Dragon Ball Daima, which is still in development, and I really don't know how it's going to be affected, but it seemed to have his footprint on it in terms of the style and the humor. So I'm curious as to how that's going to turn out. It's strange. In retrospect, I owe so much of where I am now and who I am as a person to, the punchy, kicky cartoon show that I randomly encountered one day before high school. No, not even high school, junior high. Now, of course, I never met him, but I would like to think that my gratitude got across at some point. Let me wrap it up here. In short, now well over 20 years of my life has been profoundly affected and changed in ways I could scarcely have imagined back then, thanks to that. So I have some amazing friends, and a family, and so much that is all thanks to him. 今までの人生を歩んできたのはすべて先生のおかげでした。長い間ありがとうございました。以上です。
Hey everyone, it's Heath. Well, here we are. A day we've all been dreading. Somewhere deep down in our guts, I think we've all been dreading it. A day we knew would come eventually, but we all assumed or hoped or pleaded with Dende that it happened some other day down the road. But not today. Not now. You never foresee the now, unfortunately. And today is that day that we have to face the harsh reality and the hard truth that Akira Toriyama is gone. And sadly, this isn't the first time the Dragon Ball community has had to deal with loss. We've lost some amazing legends over the years, like Takeshi Aono, Daisuke Gori, and of course Hiromi Suru. Each one has really hurt in their own way. They've all had their own impacts on us as individuals and Dragon Ball as a whole. And unfortunately, each one has also always been a sobering reminder of the inevitability that it would happen again. And that's unfortunately very true when you have such a large franchise with so many staff and actors involved in its production. But Toriyama had always been there as that one kind of constant behind the scenes. He was the glue that held it all together, so to speak. Especially in recent years, with all of his involvement throughout the franchise, between the various movies, TV, and manga, and not just in Dragon Ball. I mean, he was truly an icon of the Japanese media industry. His impact was felt by so many people globally, and I'm glad he was able to really see that, how things have changed so much in the past few decades. Having things so available globally with near instant feedback and thoughts, and not as isolated as what it once was. So after first hearing the news, I didn't really know how to process it. I didn't know how to feel. In fact, I didn't really feel anything at all. I was kind of emotionless. I mean, I didn't cry, I didn't laugh. I just remember sitting there on my couch, thinking to myself. And honestly, I just had no idea to even absorb this information. That whole night was just kind of a complete blur. I remember reaching out to a bunch of people, messaging and texting, and I ended up texting Mike at one point that night, and I wasn't really sure if he was still even awake, really. But I just kind of had to, and I remember sending him just a bunch of crying emojis. And I mean, his response was kind of the same, and we talked a bit, and you could tell we were both just kind of at a loss for what had happened, and didn't really want to talk much more about it. And it wasn't really until a few days later when I found myself sitting in my office at home. And I just remember thinking, man, this can't possibly be real, can it? And at the same time, kind of wondering to myself, why do I feel so bad about someone that I didn't even know on a personal level? But then I kind of at the same time started looking around my office, which is where I'm sitting now, and saw all these Dragon Ball items around me. All these books and magazines, posters, figures, and DVDs. Then it just kind of hit me all at once. All the emotions. And at the same time, I also felt happy that we did know him. We knew him through his work. And not only that, but over the years, we had actually learned so much more about him as a person from his old interviews. And when events like this happen in our lives, we tend to think back on things, to reminisce about the good times, recall events or experiences. And for me, Dragon Ball has always been my happy place. It has surrounded me with such great and crazy, wonderful people, many of whom are on this podcast episode, sharing their experiences with you today. And I really appreciate them all. And I love them all. And I also just kind of want to thank Mike for corralling all of us and organizing this whole thing. I tip my hat to you, sir, and I appreciate that. The outpouring of support from the community has just been amazing to witness. Just hearing all the different stories and feelings and seeing the artwork, I think really shows how far-reaching an impact Toriyama had on all of us. And for me, I'll always be thankful that I found Dragon Ball. It has been such a large part of my life. And if it weren't for Toriyama, none of this would be possible. And none of us would be here doing this right now. I wouldn't have all these people in my life. I wouldn't be the same person that I am today. Without him even knowing it, Toriyama has given me so much and given so many people so much all over the world. And undoubtedly, I can say that he bettered my life. He impacted my life in a way that has changed everything for me. And that's something I'll always cherish. Common interests can bring unlike people from all walks of life together. And we are those unlike, and we love Dragon Ball. And Toriyama was a man that thought poop on a stick was funny. And that's why we're all here. Rest in peace, Sensei. You will forever be missed, but certainly not forgotten.
Hey, Mike cutting in one last time before transitioning over to everyone else. Again, we all couldn't record at the same time, the Kanzenshuu folks here. Jake Herms wanted to have something as well. He unfortunately doesn't have his recording stuff with him right now, but he was extremely generous and kind to send in over to me a comment that I can read here. So if you don't mind, I'd like to read this from Herms right now. Last year, when the Sandland movie wasn't doing so great in theaters, Toriyama put out a message saying, go see it, even if you don't want to. I remember reading that and thinking, man, it's this guy's personality that's 85% of why I keep involved in this fandom. Translating Toriyama interviews and messages was always the most fun, not merely because he was the series creator and the source of all canon or whatever. No, much more important than that. Whenever he spoke, he always said something funny or interesting. Even in the most straightforward promo stuff, he'd include at least one offbeat comment, one deviation from the script. Even if it was something that was only funny because it was intentionally trivial, that still made it all worthwhile. As an artist and character designer, he's virtually beyond criticism. Even praising him seems unnecessary, like telling the Grand Canyon, hey, good job. As a writer, it's easy to make jokes about his terrible memory, his lack of planning ahead, or his tendency in later interviews to drastically revise Boo's origins and otherwise mess around with the lore. And on the flip side, maybe it's also too easy to praise him as a freewheeling creative genius for these traits. But either extreme aside, I think this part of him embodied a truth about storytelling which he instinctively understood. Whatever you're doing right now needs to be interesting on its own merits. If it helps set up later storylines, that's a nice bonus. And ideally, it shouldn't contradict past storylines too much. But if it's boring, don't bother. In other words, don't get too hung up on the past or future that you neglect the present. I don't think Toriyama was consciously trying to teach us this lesson by having lunch abruptly vanish from the series, but I'd argue it's one of the values implicit in his creative style. And it's the most fitting sentiment I can think of to end on besides this. Thank you, Toriyama.
Hey, this is Scott Frericks, or Kaiser Neko, of TeamFourStar. So, I admittedly have a bit of a blind spot for a lot of Akira Toriyama's work. I love his style, both in terms of art and writing, but looking back on his legacy, I feel like there's a lot that I've missed, something I do plan to rectify. But I do feel comfortable, at least in saying that I am one of the biggest Dragon Ball fans alive, Not the biggest. I've seen some of y'all, but if anyone is familiar with Abridged, then you might know that I literally dedicated my life to Dragon Ball. Before Abridged ever started, actually. From the moment I first saw Dragon Ball Z on UPN at like 11 years old, to the moment I followed it on the international channel in Japanese with no subs and Steve Simmons' website to guide me, to the moment I got to voice in one of the games, Dragon Ball has been close to my heart essentially my whole life. It changed my life, literally. And I think it's also sort of interesting that we, as Americans, like a good majority of us started watching Dragon Ball after it was well and finished, like GT included. True, many of us watched it like week to week on Toonami or Teletoon or whatever you might have had in your area, but by the time we got to it, the story had already officially wrapped. Once we'd gotten the entire series released here, we honestly had like no idea if we'd ever actually get any more. Before suddenly, if his own words are to be believed, Toriyama was inspired by the questionable quality of Dragon Ball Evolution, and the next thing we knew, new Dragon Ball was on the menu. Toriyama was Mr. like, I'm done with Dragon Ball. He had moved on for the most part, but much like the mob, it feels like Dragon Ball Evolution pulled him back in, and suddenly we had movies and then a whole new show and a manga to follow it, all with his input. And quality is subjective, but it brought us as a fan base together over and over again. And now we have one last show coming out, one last series with his fingerprints on it, Daima. And it's just weird to think about. Because again, a lot of us, not all of us, started Dragon Ball again after it was basically finished. And now, in some ways, it kind of feels like it's really coming to an end, Kind of feels like it's really coming to an end. And I'm sad about that. I'm really sad. But I also want to remember all of the times I've talked with friends about what I loved about Dragon Ball, watching Super week to week, like freaking out over Super Saiyan Rosé and like the Trunks' spirit sword, and watching Vegeta show back up, and then the Tournament of Power, and watching Krillin and 18 fight together, and getting to see Android 17 back in action, and Goku and Frieza together, and getting to see these cool, awesome movies, and being proven wrong that, yeah, you could make a cool Broly movie. And then watching Superhero and being proven that you can make a good Dragon Ball movie in 3D. And, I'm gonna miss that. I'm gonna miss talking with all of you guys about this new stuff from a man who I grew up with. So I just wanted to say that I'm grateful, so very grateful that we've had Dragon Ball. And I am so grateful that Akira Toriyama gave it to us. And I don't think the fan base is necessarily going to go anywhere, but I hope that moving forward, we can all just continue to celebrate the man's art and his legacy together. Thank you all so much.
Hello, I'm Randy from We Got a Podcast, Dragon Ball from A to Z. Toriyama's work has had an impact on my life that honestly I don't think I can quantify. His artwork and storytelling inspired me to draw and grow as an artist. I'd always been doodling as a child, but after seeing Dragon Ball, I threw myself into the hobby, wanting to get better, to get exactly what was in my head onto the page, and to share what I'd made with others. I'm a graphic designer, illustrator, and visual artist, and without him and his work, I don't know what I would have been inspired to do otherwise. Like many others, I forged friendships and relationships with people over our shared love of Toriyama's work. I literally would have a different social circle than what I have now if it wasn't for Toriyama. I wouldn't have people like Ken and Doug from We Got a Podcast to chat with on a daily basis, or Mike and his friends to play Mario Kart, or maybe even my equally anime-loving husband in my life. I didn't know the man personally, and he didn't know me, but I hope that he knew just how much his work affected and enriched the lives of his fans. For every compelling battle or emotional goodbye, there was a hilarious joke about poop on a stick or a clueless pat-pat that reminded us that there was always room for laughing in the tough times that test us. So if his passing or any other hardship you're going through has you down, remember to find something to laugh about, because that's what's going to get you through and make you stronger. Thank you, Akira Toriyama, for factually making my life better. You will be deeply missed, and I hope they have the best dirty magazines in the afterlife.
My name is Doug, aka Jabaz. I met my best friend CJ when we were about 9 years old. He was the one who introduced me to Dragon Ball. He didn't have Cartoon Network at his house, so he'd come over mine to watch DBZ, and I'd go over to his to get my ass handed to me in Tekken Tag Tournament. He came over one day with a stack of papers. I was like, what is that? He said, I went online and found episode summaries of DBZ that haven't released in America yet. We spent hours reading and gushing over it. We read about Vegeta's son from the future who can go Super Saiyan. We found out about Super Saiyan 2, 3, 4, and Fusion. It's a core memory that I cherish very much. CJ unfortunately passed away a few years back due to cancer. He was such an amazing and supportive friend. Even though my love for the series turned more into an obsession, while his attention was more geared towards dating girls or whatever, I don't know what that's like, you know what I'm talking about, fellas? He was still there for me through thick and thin, being super supportive and not judgmental at all when I needed it most. He's the one that convinced me to enter my DBZ AMVs into convention contests when I thought they weren't good enough. I still don't think they're that good enough. He still loved Dragon Ball, but his love of Dragon Ball was more healthy, I guess you would say. It's really hard to say whether we would have had such a strong bond had it not started with Dragon Ball, or if I even would have been that big a Dragon Ball fan at all. But I know for certain that thanks to CJ and Dragon Ball, life has been wonderful, and for that, I'll be forever grateful to Akira Toriyama.
This is Ken from We Got a Podcast, and several episodes of this one too. Many of us were introduced to Toriyama in our formative years, but as an artist, stumbling upon his unique style in my youth left an incredible impact that I am actually unable to shake. What started out as sketches of this cool new fighting anime I discovered soon turned into a complete takeover of my own artistic sensibilities. Though my style is still my own, to look at my art is to look at the art of someone deeply influenced by Toriyama's drawings. This hold over my sketches is something I've wrestled with trying to break free from, but even when I intentionally draw as out of my style as possible, my art is still recognized as, oh cool, looks like DBZ. Such is life. So, thank you, Toriyama-sensei. Everything about the way I visualize the world today is because of you. I feel your presence not only when I read Dragon Ball, but with every line I draw.
Hey, this is Rocco from Mega 64 here in San Diego, California. And man, Akira Toriyama's passing, I think hit all of us here a lot harder than we ever could have thought. I mean, honestly, I'll just say on my end, there's certain people in media or artists that you look up to that you kind of prepare yourself for. I mean, for years now, me and my friends have talked about like what happens when we lose Paul McCartney or Steven Spielberg. These people that make the things we love. You do think about that sometimes. But strangely enough, we never thought of Akira Toriyama that same way because I guess in my brain, it seemed like he was just kind of this never-ending well of entertainment, this almost like a deity that gave us these things. As corny as that sounds, he was almost like an ethereal force in a way, and it maybe that had something to do with how maybe kind of reclusive and hidden behind the scenes he was, but it just seemed like something that couldn't end. It felt impossible that our world would not have such a source of entertainment and joy. And I was saying just recently that the stuff that he made transcended just being entertaining or cool or badass. Like, I was a lazy kid. I liked, sitting at home and playing video games. And even me, like when I discovered Dragon Ball Z, I started lifting weights and running on the treadmill when I would watch every episode because that's what Goku did. He was so cool and it was so inspiring. Me and other kids in junior high gym class would try to convince each other we could go Super Saiyan. We would work out harder and strain ourselves to try. But that's how powerful his work was. It wasn't just fun to watch. It made life better. It really did. Our childhoods, our adulthoods were better because of his work. Even now as an adult working here at Mega 64, we made a video where just on a lark, we made a video where we tried to recreate Dragon Ball Z with household items. We recreated the Cell Saga with just, basketballs and foam and tape and cardboard. And it was our most viewed video we'd ever made. And we've been making videos for 20 years, but people just wanted to see, how are they going to make Cell? How are they going to, what are you going to make Frieza's costume out of? What are you going to, I think it's less to do with us and more just Toriyama's designs were so iconic and so still entertaining just to look at, that people had to see how someone else would interpret that and how it could be brought into the real world. And it just really is a testament to how good his work was. And so it hits me hard. We're going to miss Akira Toriyama for a long, long time. That's going to be felt for a long, long time. We miss you, Akira Toriyama.
Hi, this is Gaffer Tape from the forums. You might know me as MistareFusion from the YouTube channel MistareFusion. It's both easy and difficult for me to express why Dragon Ball drew me in. It's a multi-generational martial arts epic built on a foundation of dick jokes and panties. Nothing about this should work. But there's such a charm to Toriyama's humor and expertise to his paneling, a kinetic energy to his action. There were a lot of things I was a fan of growing up. There are very few of them I carried continuously with me into adulthood. Dragon Ball's been with me for over 25 years. And while there are so many talented people who contributed to why I love this crazy thing, it's amazing how much of it is due to one man. Thank you, Mr. Toriyama. We will miss you.
Hi, my name is Naaim Siddiqui. You probably don't know me from my baseball podcast, Rain Delay Radio. You might know me from one of my defunct or on hiatus podcasts, Podcast Anti-Power Rangers or Motion City Podcast. Or you might know me on Twitter or the social media sphere as Kuhan. And that's where I should start with my connection and love of Akira Toriyama. Kuhan comes from Goku and Gohan, and it's the name I have associated myself with for over 20 years now. It's the name I picked when I joined the Dragon Ball Z live-action movie forum, where I learned how to write, I learned how to communicate, I learned how to be a citizen of the internet, as it were. I learned how to do Photoshop because I wanted to make forum signatures for that forum. I learned how to use Adobe Premiere because I wanted to make Dragon Ball Z AMVs. I learned how to podcast because I listened to this show back when it was called Kanzenshuu EX. I heard of this show and I thought, well, these guys are amateurs and they seem to know what they're doing. And I've told Mike that before he was a friend, he was an inspiration. And that's what's brought me to this medium that I love. Is this show that I loved. And it's hard because, it's hard to quantify. I don't know who I am without Dragon Ball being in my life, because all of these things I didn't even realize until Toriyama passed away. The germ of them came from Dragon Ball, right? Without Dragon Ball, do I become a podcaster? Do I learn how to edit Photoshop? Who am I? Who am I as a person? I just don't know. And so, for these reasons and more, Toriyama will be missed. It's shocking how instrumental he was in my life. Potentially the only person as instrumental in my life was George Lucas in Star Wars. And this is just from Dragon Ball, right? I never made it over to Dragon Quest or Chrono Trigger on the games. I read some Dr. Slump and I read Sandland, but it's all from Dragon Ball, just from the one creation of his many works that were influential to many people. Just this one was so instrumental and so pivotal in my life and who I am as a person, that it's impossible to quantify. So thank you, Toriyama Sensei, for me, for who I am, and you will be missed.
This is Dawn from the Anime Nostalgia Podcast. It's really hard to put into words the feeling that I felt when I opened Twitter and saw that Akira Toriyama had passed away. It almost felt like a part of your family had died, because Akira Toriyama's work has been such a constant in my life for so long now, and it just felt like heartbreaking to lose something like that. I'm sure that by now plenty of people have said all sorts of things about, his legacy and his work, and if you're a fan, you probably already know all of that stuff, so I don't really have to sit here and repeat it. But Toriyama's work was something that not only just brought, happiness and joy into my life, but it also brought me together with some of my closest friends that I've known for so long. Back in the day, before everyone was on the internet, I met people through anime pen paling who had similar interests. We'd be like, oh, what kind of anime do you like? And finding somebody that not only knew what Dragon Ball was or what Dr. Slump was, but also loved it was invaluable back in the day. And there are still people that I've met that way that I still talk to this day that are very, very dear friends of mine. And to think that I wouldn't have met them without our shared love of such an iconic creator, there's no words for how thankful and grateful I am for that. And I think there's a lot of people out there that probably have similar stories to mine, that they found lifelong friends, maybe even a partner through their shared love of, Dragon Ball or Dragon Quest or any of the other things that Toriyama did. And it's pretty amazing. And it's really, again, it's heartbreaking to have lost such a wonderful and beloved creator. And I just want to say with all of my heart, thank you, Akira Toriyama, for helping me meet some of the best friends I've ever had in my whole life. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Jason Bradley Thompson. I was the editor of most of the Dragon Ball manga volumes for Viz, picking up from Trish Ledoux, who edited the first 8 volumes. And what could I say? What a tragedy it is that Toriyama died so young, but what beautiful and wonderful and classic manga he left behind. I remember the first time I read Dragon Ball, and that it was actually one of the first shonen manga that I really loved. I'd gotten into manga and anime in the 90s when it was, among all the friends I knew, it was all about cyberpunk and science fiction, stuff like Masamune Shiro and Battle Angel Alita. And so Dragon Ball had so much of a more cartoony and brighter look. And but I borrowed all the manga volumes from Viz before it was translated officially, and I read them all, and how can you not fall in love with it? It's so good. The characters are so good, and the drama and the pacing and the sense of adventure is so amazing. I still think back to some of the fight sequences, particularly in the Frieza arc and the Vegeta arc, and how incredible they are. And just some moments and images are so just wonderfully weird. And like, I remember one of the scenes when Piccolo flexes his bicep, and the energy of his bicep flex destroys the city. And I was like, this is amazing. And that's just one example out of 100 because it's such a beautiful series. And I had the good luck to meet Toriyama when he came to the USA to promote Shonen Jump magazine. And he was really friendly and really nice. And he actually asked me, I told him I love Dragon Ball so much, and he asked me, oh, what do you think of Dr. Slump? And to my eternal shame, I hadn't read Slump yet, but I read it later, and and it's also an incredible series, and you can see how much of himself he poured into it, and how much he poured into his sort of science fiction side, and his goofy side, and his poop humor side, and all of that stuff. And whereas Dragon Ball, obviously it goes in a different area, and it tends to be a little more serious, quote unquote, drama. But it's also great. It's also so good, and it's amazing that he managed to make these two wonderful manga. And I think I feel so sad for his family, but it's great that he made these wonderful works of art that I think will endure.
Hi, this is Joey Weiser, cartoonist and author of graphic novels such as Dragon Racer and Ghost Hog. Years ago, you may recall I was on the Kanzenshuu podcast talking about my daily Dragon Ball drawing project, where I drew a character from the Dragon Ball manga every single day for about a year. I first discovered Akira Toriyama's work through images of his art online before DBZ was even airing on American TV. Toriyama ended up leading to a lot of firsts for me. My first VHS fan subs, my first time importing manga from Japan, my first time attempting to read that manga after I had started studying Japanese. Also, my first interactions with strangers on the internet, thanks to various Dragon Ball fan groups and fan sites. As my tastes evolved over the years, Toriyama's work always stuck with me, and my view of his work evolved as well. Besides just loving the work itself, I have a lot of respect for his attitude towards his work. His relaxed attitude and sense of humor about himself may have led to some misinterpretations about him as an artist, but I think it's important to not take yourself so seriously. Akira Toriyama was actually an extremely hardworking cartoonist, often working with little to no assistance and pushing himself to try new things as an artist, and I think always finding new ways to have fun creating that art. I find the simpler style of his later years very inspiring. Toriyama's philosophy was that as Frieza became less and less ornate, he became more powerful. This is going to be a big year for adaptations of Toriyama's work. I'll miss his flippant and insightful remarks when new works like these debut, but it's some consolation that his characters and worlds live on. So, Akira Toriyama, thank you for your work and the impact you've had on my life.
This is Ajay, otherwise known as Anime Ajay, moderator here on Kanzenshuu, and also known for animation insight on Twitter and YouTube and all that stuff. Man. The impact of Toriyama's death has been a really weird one to process. Understandably, a lot of people have had really intense emotional reactions to it, almost like you would if you'd lost a family member, and I so understand that. It's a crazy, crazy thing to process. I think I probably won't feel that absence until after Timer, until we start to hit a point where products release without Toriyama involvement. We won't get those funny little notes anymore, the little illustrations and all those hilarious little tidbits that usually come about through them. He's always been a private person, and so I've not really felt that absence just yet. I think instead what I've been really struck by is an overwhelming sense of appreciation, as a newfound respect and understanding of just how impactful his work has actually been throughout my life. Like so many, I'm sure, my love of art, my ability to draw, it all came about through copying Toriyama's work as a kid. I mean, my love of animation, the thing that just consumes my day-to-day life, that's all because of the Dragon Ball anime. But I think what really hits me the hardest is just how profound the series has been in my day-to-day life. I met my childhood best friend when I was like 7 or 8, all because he had a Dragon Ball pencil case. That was the only thing that got us talking. And what's crazy is that when I then fell out of anime for a little while, it was Dragon Ball that pulled me back in. It was what first got me on Kanzenshuu when a friend recommended Kai to me. From there, I have met people who I consider my closest friends, who I speak to every single day. And it's also allowed me to develop a career talking about things I love. I have literally traveled around the world meeting like-minded fans and sharing my love for Toriyama. I went to Japan twice for Dragon Ball. I flew to Texas for Dragon Ball. It's indescribable. That shared social element surrounding this series is not something I have encountered to the same extent in any other property. And I think that's the magic of Toriyama's work. It's so fun and full of relentless optimism that it's hard not to connect with others when talking about it. There's always going to be some kind of common ground. It just doesn't have a cynical bone in its body, and I think that relentless shonen optimism is why I have always been drawn to it, particularly at times when my mental health hasn't been in the best state. It's always been there to pick me up again. It's really weird to be in an era now where we just won't have Toriyama Dragon Ball anymore, but the legacy he's left behind is so powerful and so timeless that I think his work will continue to unite and inspire people for as long as it's available, and I just think that is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
This is Brandon Bovia from North Carolina. I'm the English letterer of Dragon Ball Super, and I have been for about 4 years now. I'm the person who copied pastes the translations into the artwork, and I make sure that all the text is centered. I make sure all the formatting, that nothing looks weird. And I also adapt to the English sound effects for the volume releases, which can be months and months of hard work in and of itself. And that's something I really kind of hemmed and hawed over when I started, working on Super, which I obviously, as a lifelong Dragon Ball fan, I jumped at the opportunity. But I also put a lot of thought and a lot of research into just like how Dragon Ball as a manga has been sort of like adapted in a visual sense over the years, and kind of absorbing all of that while also kind of still maintaining like my own style. Trying to really thread the needle between like my own work and the work of previous letterers for Dragon Ball content, while also, of course, trying to match the style of the original art, and making sure that I get as close as possible. Like, there's a lot to juggle when it comes to doing like sound effects and stuff for any manga, but I see all of like the love and care and attention that the fans put into the work, and I try to keep that in mind as I work on anything, but with Dragon Ball in particular, because it's such a special series to me, that I hope that, if you're ever reading the manga, that you stop and think like, somebody had to make sure that the English text, looked a certain way. And that's sort of creative work in its own way too. It's my life's honor to kind of leave my own mark on Toriyama Sensei and Toyotaro's work, kind of in my own way. While still, like just trying to make a good readable product overall. And it's unclear whether or not the manga will continue at this point, but whether it does or not, I'll always be here, both as a professional, and as a fan. Just one, cherishing that I had this opportunity in the first place, but also that there's still so much of like Toriyama's work to be celebrated and to be cherished by fans. So I just think that's a really wonderful thing.
Hey, this is Kirran, sometimes your Moonstone on the internet. And I've struggled really hard with this news and with how to say it, so I got something written down here. It's a little all over the place, and I'm going to try my best not to cry. Real quick, I want to thank Mike for putting this all together. I know we're all feeling it, and something like this really helps me through it. I hope this helps some other people too. It's hard to talk about somebody you've never met. It's hard to know what words are implying too much and what sentiments might be too presumptuous. How do you grieve for someone you don't really know? I don't think there's a correct way to grieve or feel these feelings, so I'll start with what I do know about him. What I know about Toriyama is that he was capable of producing art that resonated not only with me, but with countless others across the world. This is someone who set out to make himself and others laugh at poop jokes and ended up making countries gather to cheer and feel that triumph against impossibility. And I'm not just talking about recent events with super premieres in the stadiums or whatever. This is something people did from their homes for generations, right? Like that could just be me, right? Screaming at the top of my lungs when Gohan first went Super Saiyan 2. Thankfully, nobody was home. Scrambling to hide my single chapter comic releases of Dragon Ball in class. making sure my TV was off, but I paused my playthrough of Budokai 3. It's hard to overstate just how much Dragon Ball and all of Toriyama's work has encompassed so much of my life. I started drawing thanks to him. I started creating in general because of his work. I did horrible fan dubs of the Bardock movie, which has led me to pursuing a little bit of actual voice acting. I have made terrible AMVs to Gohan's transformation and many other things that got me to start editing like I do now as a job. I made terrible RPG Maker games, which I am still actively making. I'm still actively making games. Just I wanted to make RPG Maker games based on Dragon Ball. I started drawing seriously once I realized I could kind of draw Dragon Ball faces and hair. Now I'm drawing cards for my own card game I'm making because of that moment. I got into martial arts, and that one I don't really keep up with as much, but I still did it for a bit. I made lifelong friends from the connection that we all had with Dragon Ball. I've made music, which I still do. I got invested in a community about his stuff and even got to be on their podcast a couple times. I wouldn't even have gotten a microphone and started my own podcast and journey into everything that I do now without Daizenshu, EX, and now Kanzenshuu and all of his work. I can't even imagine what my life would be like without his influence. And frankly, I think it's pointless to play with the what ifs. So I want to focus on the now. This is a man who inspired me to do so many things, made me feel these things so deeply, but most importantly, made me feel like it was possible. He knew how to make things seem unbelievably out of reach, but through effort and friendship, somehow victory was possible. I know these are the Shonen Jump tenets, but truly none of them were encapsulated more than in Dragon Ball, at least for me. And the cascade of creators that have poured their hearts out, expressing love, loss, and desire to continue what they do, it stirs something so deep within me. I've been a creator for as long as I can remember, and with Toriyama's passing, I want so desperately to do what I feel like his art told me, what I feel like he was telling me through his art. In some ways, I got to know the shape of his spirit. In some ways, I did get to know him, and I want the world to see how beautiful that thing is, that they are capable of overcoming the odds and doing whatever they try to do. So in my work and in my life, I hope I can carry on Toriyama's spirit just a little further. Thank you for changing my world.
What's up, everybody? This is Mike Daniels, former NFL football player from New Jersey. Man, I gotta tell you, Akira Toriyama, Toriyama Sensei, the GOAT, the icon, rest in power to him, rest in peace to him, and blessings to his entire family. That man's creation changed my life. And because his creation changed my life, so did he. I used to get picked on a lot when I was a young kid, and watching how Goku, Gohan, Piccolo, and then eventually Vegeta really turned around, and no matter what happened, they fought to get better. No matter how badly they got beat down, no matter how badly they got ran over, they even died, you know what I mean, a couple times, came back and came back stronger, came back better every time. And that's how I live my life. And I took that from getting bullied all the way to having a 10-year NFL career. The mentality that I'm going to make sure I get better no matter what hardship I come across. And for Toriyama to create a series like Dragon Ball, I got to say, man, it definitely is definitely heartwarming to know that we all have come together and had a shared love and interest for the series, for the collective. So to all my Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Super, and yes, Dragon Ball AF, for those of us who are around for those rumors, which realistic is a precursor to Super, but we won't get into all that. I just want to say, man, I love you all. It's a wonderful brotherhood, sisterhood, family to be part of. So I thank you guys. I'm actually sitting with one of my best friends, like a brother of mine, and like I said, I'm from New Jersey. He's from Chicago. We played college football together. And he's nodding his head right now as I'm talking about Dragon Ball because somebody from a whole nother part of the country lived a shared experience as me with Dragon Ball. It motivated him the same way it motivated me. So I know there's many others like us. And I just want to say thank you, Toriyama Sensei. Thank you for everything.
Hey everybody, this is Ryan Molina, aka Caster Troy from Vegeta Insane and Ginga GIRI, and I'm here to pay my respects to the late Akira Toriyama. So back in the fall of 1998 when Dragon Ball Z was airing on Cartoon Network, I was starting my senior year in high school, and I was in a pretty dark place in my life, and I felt like nothing was going to get any better. So one day I was depressed watching TV on the couch, and then I stumbled upon Dragon Ball Z on Cartoon Network. I think it was the 5th episode right after the fight with Raditz. So I watched that episode, then I wanted to watch the next one, and the next one, and the next one, to the point of obsession, and I can definitely say watching Dragon Ball Z got me out of my depressive mood. Because after that, I wanted to be part of the Dragon Ball Z web community, where I learned a whole bunch of new skills, I made a whole bunch of new friends who I'm friends with to this day, and it basically snowballed my entire career up to this point. And to say that Akira Toriyama changed my life is an understatement. I mean, I owe everything to Akira Toriyama, and I can sincerely say from the bottom of my heart that Dragon Ball Z technically saved my life, and I wouldn't be here today without it. So I want to give a huge, sincere thanks once again to Akira Toriyama. It's been kind of tough to process everything. I mean, it still does not feel real at this point, and I'm pretty sure that everyone listening to this will agree that Akira Toriyama has been such a huge inspiration on not just my life, but so many other people's lives. And I hope he realizes how much that he's really changed the world. So thank you so much, Akira Toriyama.
My name is Steve Yurko, and I am a co-host on the One Piece podcast from Maji Media, and I'm a storyboard artist on Rick and Morty. I don't think my life would have followed the trajectory that it did if it wasn't for Akira Toriyama's work. I'm pretty sure that isn't the first time you've heard someone say that, and I'm willing to bet it's far from the last. However, it being such a common sentiment should not be ignored. Dragon Ball seems to be this common upbringing that so many of us share. It was our gateway to the world of manga and anime, and it's not just a matter of being available to us at the right place and the right time. Akira Toriyama's work is timeless because of his mastery. From his appealing and signature graphic design to his simply brilliant page layouts with an easy-to-follow flow to his action, and last but not least, his signature quirkiness and humor. That is the lasting power of Toriyama. Each time I revisit his work, I find something new to appreciate that I might not have realized at the time. I can't help but feel like I took him for granted, thinking he'll always be around to incorporate something new, fresh, but so very Toriyama into the franchises he was a part of. I respect him for embracing his limitations, and it only made me admire him more for his transparency. He seemed like a humble guy. I'm saddened to come to terms that we'll never hear from him again. His return to Dragon Ball has been so appreciated because he's put so much of himself back into it. I can't believe one of the most powerful characters was inspired by his cat. It hurts because he felt like he had so much left to share with us. I'll take this time to reread Dragon Ball, Manga Theater, maybe even finally start Dr. Slump or a Dragon Quest game. Doing so knowing there'll always be something new to discover and appreciate. Thank you for the memories, and the memories that have yet to be created.
Hi, this is Alex Kazanas from the One Piece podcast. It's been a few weeks, and I'm still reeling over the news of Akira Toriyama's passing. It's a real shock when someone as influential as Toriyama shakes off this mortal coil into the great beyond, and I don't think anyone has had a bigger impact on me than the man himself. Like many of you, I discovered Dragon Ball during my early teenage years. An incredibly formative time in my life, obviously. Little did I know that the spiky-haired characters that littered the import game ads on the back of Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine would make such an impact on me. Dragon Ball was not only my gateway into manga and anime, but Japanese culture as well. It even influenced my own art. Toriyama's creations shaped me into the person that I am today. Long and short of it, when you connect the dots anyway. When I eventually got into One Piece, it didn't shock me at all that it was heavily influenced by Toriyama's work. It didn't take long for me to realize that the scope of manga as we know it wouldn't be the same if not for him and his vast catalog. And years later, when the internet became what it is today, I would not be surprised to learn that it touched so many other people. Not to be the back in my day sort, but when I was coming up, we traded VHS tapes. We watched RM files on Real Player, which on a 56K modem buffered at a pretty slow rate. We imported video games. We basically got what we wanted by any means necessary, and it was so hard to do. And, we had to endure some dubs. Some good, some bad. I'll let you figure that one out. But yeah, we had to do all of that in order to get to enjoy the works of Akira Toriyama. And right now, I'm glad that we live in an age where all of that is easily at everyone's fingertips, ushering new generations to enjoy the work of a genius. This is my long-winded way of saying thank you to Akira Toriyama. Thank you. Thank you for giving the world something special and for shaping all of us.
This is Gaby, or MozillaVulpix on YouTube and the social medias. By all logical standards, I shouldn't have really liked Dragon Ball. I was never the target demographic, and marketing and localization for the franchise scared me off it completely as a kid. But as I started researching it, first out of curiosity and then out of genuine enjoyment, I realized Dragon Ball can be for everyone. You don't have to be a Japanese grade schooler to get something out of Goku and his friends and his constant search for adventure and self-improvement. Even if the situations are fantastical, they're always grounded in emotions that are relatable and make you want to try your best no matter who you are. And I think that goes for a lot of Toriyama's works. It affected me in ways I still can't fully comprehend, and I'm so thankful to the life of Akira Toriyama for creating it.
Hey there, this is Zénpai. The Portuguese have always had a special relationship with Dragon Ball. We were fortunate enough to have the show aired from the very beginning, starting with Dragon Ball Episode 1. And by the time we got to Dragon Ball Z, the series was already huge over here. By the time we got to the Cell games, we couldn't get enough of it. We had 11, yes, count them, 11 episodes airing on Portuguese TV every single week. It was like the national fever. Hell, some schools stopped scheduling lessons around the time the episodes aired because most students just never bothered to attend. And some companies even started scheduling their breaks around the episodes just so their employees could watch. And yet, we can't even say that it was exclusively our thing here in Portugal. Because I don't believe there was a single country where Dragon Ball aired where it wasn't a massive success. And despite this being the 90s and all the dubbing and localization practices we had back then, and availability not being anywhere near the levels we have today, Akira Toriyama's talent for storytelling still shone through all those hurdles. The animated series will always be the one that pulls in the most attention, but personally, as a massive comics fan, the original manga was where it was at for me. To be able to enjoy that most engaging of stories directly from Sensei's masterful pen. And Akira Toriyama truly was a master of his craft. The action flowed so well from panel to panel that sometimes I felt like I was watching an animated series rather than reading a comic book. And looking for more of that Toriyama fix, I even read most of his other series. And what can I say except, it's all still there. The charm permeates everything he's ever touched, from his comics to his character designs. I consider myself a very slow reader, and yet Dr. Slump is easily the fastest 18 volumes I've ever read. That's how easy it was to read, and how engaged I was. Whether it be through the animated series, the innumerable amounts of video games, or even the original manga, which I've read more than any other series, Dragon Ball has accompanied me throughout my life for nearly 30 years. It allowed me to make so many new friendships, and was my gateway into the world of anime and manga, the Japanese language, and Japanese culture in general, which in turn not only allowed me to make even more friendships, it also gave me not one, but two different stable careers. That's how special it is to me. I can truly say from the bottom of my heart that Dragon Ball has changed my life.
Hey everyone, Cubaz here. One of the things that Dragon Ball has given me has been a sense of belonging. I got into the franchise after its original run here in Portugal had already finished. My mom, who was already a fan of the series, gifted me a copy of Dragon Ball Z the movie, which was an edited version of Z Movies 12 and 13 combining to a single feature, as well as the PlayStation 2 version of Budokai 1. It was late, it was out of order, but I immediately fell in love with its world, characters, and messages. Like many kids who grew up watching the show, initially it served as an escape. Goku was always there to greet me no matter what was happening in my day-to-day life, and his constant drive to be a better version of himself spoke directly to me during those formative years. It also led me to meet wonderful people, many of which I'm still friends with. Some who are already fans of the franchise and so we bonded over it, and others that saw my passion for Dragon Ball and got inspired in their own way. Differently from what you would call a childhood cartoon, Dragon Ball has always stuck around in my life. And I think that speaks volumes to what kind of author Akira Toriyama was. The story of Dragon Ball, from beginning to end, is an ever-changing adventure that in a way is relatable to a lot of people. Goku starts by not knowing much of the world, but throughout his journey, slowly starts to understand how it works and realizes that sometimes it's not completely fair. He makes friends, but could go sometimes years without seeing them because they just go their separate ways. He learns about death, but also gets married and has his own children for whom he gives his life. These are experiences that people can picture themselves in, and it's the reason why throughout the years, whenever I revisit this story, I always end up looking at it with a different perspective. I think it grows alongside you. I'd like to mention the Genki Dama because I think that Toriyama was a genius for coming up with that move. You raise your hands to the sky to gather energy into a powerful attack, but it's only effective if other people help you out. I've had multiple Genki Dama moments, from raising my hands during my first watch of the show to doing the same alongside thousands of fans in conventions or gatherings. To me, the Genki Dama has been a sign of hope and proof that I was not alone. Thank you, Toriyama, for making sure that I was never alone.
Hi, my name is Jake. You can find me online as JLunarS or just Lunar. I'm around. There's a special magic about Akira Toriyama's work that resonates with people of all ages. I was 5 years old when I caught DBZ on Saturday mornings and was immediately hooked in a way that when I look back on it, I don't really remember what it felt like to discover Toriyama's work. It wasn't until a couple years later at a local comic shop that I found out about the original manga. At the time, the newest floppy release featured Vegeta fighting Gohan during the Saiyan arc. After briefly skimming through, an impression was left on me. There were curse words and blood. I didn't fully grasp if the chicken came before the egg, but I knew that Dragon Ball could be edgier. A bit of laughter at the jokes, a bit of whispering cool under my breath. You know what I mean. Even if our country's censorship played a hand into motivating me to discover more, I know now that the edginess was never the point. Besides, the rest of the world loved Dragon Ball just the way it was before we ever got our hands on it. Hey, everyone, quick question. How many people have actually read Dragon Ball? I think the answer is somewhere between more than you think and less than should have. I was 16 or 17 when I finally read through Dragon Ball from start to finish, and I couldn't believe how much fun I was having reading it. I already knew everything that was about to happen. I had watched the show. I was interacting with the community. Shoutouts Kanzenshuu EX forums. But I was genuinely having a great time. The man was able to tap into something special with his storytelling. The feeling I get when I look at Toriyama's work is of a kid using his talent to make something fun. From any point in his career, through any of his art style shifts over the decades, I feel like he is reaching into me and pulling out my childhood. It is arguable that I feel that way because of my innate nostalgia, having been exposed to his work my whole life. And yeah, that's fair. But I'm not alone on that feeling. As an aside, I love that his other hobbies bleed into his work sometimes. His appreciation for vehicles put to ink could fill an entire art book. You could feel that Toriyama loved drawing. Distilled into an idea, it feels that when you read his stories or view his illustrations, he wants you to laugh or say, "Suge!" He is unparalleled in this. Every time I reread Dragon Ball, I'm that kid standing in the comic book shop again. Now at age 32, I'm realizing how rare and precious that experience is of feeling someone's spirit come right off the page. His ki is incredible. For me, Akira Toriyama's passing felt like an indescribable force leaving us. It can't be quantified how influential he is. Following his passing, I often find myself thinking about his family and colleagues. We know so little about the man that brought us so much joy. If you feel the same way about his work that I do, I highly encourage you to read his other works. Even if you end up liking them less than Dragon Ball, his charm is felt on every page, even his earliest stuff. To Toriyama, arigato, sayonara.
This is Stacy, also known as Sailor Spaz. I am an occasional translation contributor to Kanzenshuu and an occasional podcaster at Annie Bros Creative. Like a lot of American fans, my knowledge of Toriyama's work started with Dragon Ball, and it's still my biggest fandom to this day. I was first exposed to Dragon Ball in the mid to late 90s. I think it was before Viz had even officially started translating, and at that time scanlations weren't much of a thing yet, just because most people didn't have editing software. But I did have one friend who had the manga in Japanese, and she had printed out some translations from online, so you should just kind of look at them side by side. So like the very first scene I ended up seeing was the part where Bulma flashes everyone trying to get the Dragon Ball. Quite an introduction to the series for my young, innocent mind at the time. I didn't actually get into the series until maybe a year or two after that, when I happened to catch some Dragon Ball Z playing on a Saturday morning cartoon block, and I kind of immediately got pulled in at that point, mainly because it was random Namek Planet episodes where Vegeta was running around being a dick to everyone, and I just had to know more about him mainly. I think that is one of Toriyama's biggest strengths, is creating compelling characters. Even ones that seem simple will have some sort of quirk or just something that makes them interesting and draws you into their story. So once I was in, quickly going down the rabbit hole of reading fan sites, synopses about things way before I would ever see them. I started buying the manga in Japanese from Kinokuniya. On my high school student budget, I was buying them 7 volumes at a time, not even going through in order, but just from the parts I thought I would like based on what I'd read about what happens, and then eventually having them all, even though I couldn't yet read them at that level of Japanese, though I did eventually get there, yay! And then I just keep going with getting the guidebooks, CDs, and picking up the money-consuming and space-consuming habit of figure collection. Not to mention the wonderful world of shipping and fanworks. And through things like forums, Twitter, Discord, I've also been able to connect with fans from all over the world. At this point, I've been in the fandom over half my life, and I'm very grateful for the people I've met, whether virtually or in person, and just all the fun times I've had engaging with the series. Even though the original manga ended decades ago, Toriyama often stayed involved, adding his special touch to new projects. Whether he was involved from the beginning, or came in to be like, you're doing that wrong, let me fix that. It was always nice to see him trying to bring things back to his original vision. I mean, if he wanted to make a movie about Piccolo in the year of our Dende 2022, who was going to tell him no? But unfortunately now we have to face the fact that beyond the upcoming projects we know about, like Daima, that magic Toriyama touch will be absent going forward. The people handling the series now will do their best. They may even make great things, but there's something that just won't be the same anymore. In the 40th anniversary year of Dragon Ball, there's still so much we can enjoy from his long career, but it still feels like it was tragically cut short. There's been a grand outpouring of grief and appreciation from all around the world, showing that his works touched probably billions of people across the decades. A man who liked to crack poop jokes and build model kits would probably be embarrassed by the level of attention he's been receiving, but it was definitely deserved with the impact that he had. So I wish I could wish him a happy 69th birthday today, but instead I just say rest in peace to the legendary Akira Toriyama.
Hey, this is Mark from the YouTube channel Totally Not Mark. Outside of a couple of tweets acknowledging Akira Toriyama's passing, I've intentionally withheld from writing anything to do with Dragon Ball. And I think that's sort of my way of mourning this incredible loss. And with that, it's also given me a lot of time to consider why I feel as strongly as I do about this sad passing, considering I never knew the man. When I was younger, I would watch Dragon Ball Z with my little brother, and whenever Goku would kick the bucket, I'd actually get upset. I think I even cried once. I never liked seeing my favorite character die, and reassuringly, my mom would tell me that Goku would come back again. I feel it's probably important to mention that I wasn't like some 20-year-old guy watching Kai with my mom. I was a little kid, okay? But I digress. Flash forward to the present day, I wake up, I look at my phone, and I see that I've gotten a message from my friend. He's asking me if I've heard the news. Toriyama had passed. And as soon as I read it, I could feel that same emotional reaction I had when I was a kid, one I hadn't felt since then. And without thinking, I actually said out loud, wow, Goku's actually gone this time. It's funny, I've learned so much from Akira Toriyama indirectly that I forget how much of an impact he's specifically had on my life. And fittingly, even in passing, he's managed to teach me that you don't need to be in someone's life to have a profound impact on them. I started to draw because of him. I found some of my closest friends because of him. And my love of stories began with Dragon Ball. He gave me a career, he gave me a house, he helped me feed my family. Thank you so much, Akira Toriyama, and you will never be forgotten.
Hey there, it's Tyson, aka T. Helms. I'm recording this amidst moving houses, so please excuse the fact that I sound like I'm in a bathroom. And honestly, I still don't know what to say about all of this. As of recording, it's been over a month since the news of his passing, and it still doesn't feel real in the slightest. I don't know, Toriyama's always been this larger-than-life figure in a very real sense. I don't know if that was because of his reclusive nature, or just because of how otherworldly his skills and accomplishments were. I think of all of the celebrity comments that came from this, I think Yusuke Murata's is probably the one that speaks most to how I feel. In his tweet, he said, "Strangely, it doesn't feel at all like he's gone. Perhaps because for me, he was always almost like a star in the sky." The concept that he is gone is something that I find almost impossible to process because it never really felt like he was here, as odd as that sounds. Toriyama's kind of gathered a reputation as a guy that shot from the hip and was lazy whenever he could be. And, obviously that's true to some extent. Over the years, it's kind of been exaggerated to the point of losing the truth in the matter, which is ultimately that Toriyama was, whether it be out of necessity of the manga industry or of his own personal drive, Toriyama was a man that worked incredibly hard and through that wholly mastered his craft. When Toriyama makes those sorts of comments, they're obviously kind of meant to be tongue-in-cheek and self-deprecating, but they obscure the fact that he is humbly speaking from his own perspective. You get any person who works 15 hours a day and they'll tell you the day they worked 12 hours a day was pretty lazy. But this is the guy who whipped out incredibly detailed and beautiful illustrations of machinery and guns and dinosaurs for chapter covers under a deadline just because he liked it. A guy that designed 30 bajillion spots on Cell because it does look cool. It obviously sounds, dramatic, but for me personally, there is quite literally no part of my life that would be the same without Toriyama. I met the love of my life through Dragon Ball. I met so many of my closest and dearest friends through Toriyama. Where I live, the job I work, who I lay down next to every single night, my deep adoration and pursuit of art in all forms. These all, for me, were born quite literally from Toriyama. And obviously my circumstances are exceptional. Beyond people like me, beyond people like my partner, whose literal professional role as a concept artist and illustrator, I can't even begin to describe how much Toriyama impacted and influenced her interest in art and machinery and all sorts of things that he cared about. Beyond all those exceptional sorts of examples, Toriyama's influence in the world is inescapable. Dragon Ball bumper stickers in every parking lot, admittedly corny Dragon Ball tank tops in every gym, an Arale on every Japanese street corner. His works have influenced the lives of so many and have certainly irreversibly changed mine. And there wasn't ever really a way that I could have thanked him for everything that he's done before. And there certainly isn't now. At the end of it all, I wonder how Toriyama would feel about all this, how he would want us to perceive this and mourn him. And, none of us really know him, but I think there's a good chance that ultimately he would just be stoked that we care so much about something he created. So that's what I'm trying to focus on with this, is just that even with him gone, as hard as it is to accept, that his works will live on forever and ever as long as paper and digital screens continue to exist. And though I wish that he was still here, I don't think there's any better possible fate to befall a lifelong artist than to have your life's work be eternally immortalized in the hearts of quite literally the entire world. So if you can somehow hear this, thank you so much, Toriyama. I will continue to read and be inspired by your works and approach life with the vigor that you did for as long as I possibly can.
So that's that. Thank you, everyone, all the listeners here for sticking around. Hopefully it didn't get too dusty in the room, but it did for me because I put this all together and I heard all of these stories. Thank you to everyone listening, to everyone who sent something, and your words mean a lot to me. Your actions mean a lot to me. So, Meri,
Mike,
what do we do at this point? I guess we wrap it up for audio podcast folks. You're going to continue on. You'll hear some Mario Kart bullshit after all this. So enjoy that. If you're listening on YouTube, head on over and listen to that. Watch that separately. But www.kanzenshuu.com. That's kanzenshuu.com.
Not a book.
No, Kanzenshuu is the Kanzenshuu is a book. No,
that's not confusing at all.
No, there is no such thing as a Kanzenshuu. Where am I going with this? Yes, so mentioned earlier in the show that this kind of like broke us and motivated us in different ways. Obviously, we got a lot of projects going on right now. You'll notice Julian's translation output has really cranked up recently. That's just one way in which you can see what this news has done to us. Kind of realizing that we all have limited time on this earth and there's a lot we want to do and accomplish, and we're not getting any younger and there's still a lot to do. So
that wiki though.
Yeah. Hey. 2024. Hey. That's a year.
Yeah, it is. Anything could happen.
Anything could happen in 2024. So thank you, everyone. Check out the website. Read something of Toriyama's that you haven't read before.
Ooh, I like it. I like that mandate.
It's so easy. Isn't a shill plug? Viz has Manga Theater up on their digital service right now. If you want to pay $3, you can just read the vast majority of Toriyama's one-shots. Dr. Slump is all available in print and digitally. Maybe someday the gods will bestow an official translation of Kajika upon us, but until that time, obviously there's Sandland. You got Jocko. You're tempted to say, like, I'm going to miss the guy. I never knew the guy, but as you've heard, he impacted all of our lives. His presence will forever be felt, and I'm truly thankful for that. It means the world to me. That guy who just wanted a paycheck, wanted to write some dumb little stories, never wanted to get involved in this long-term serial storytelling, accidentally fell into a second magnum opus. That guy, he did all that and made all of our lives better for it. Thanks, dude.